Jesus walking on the water. Or you might even say Jesus and some of that time, Peter walking on the water. Well, let's look at it together. Immediately, Jesus, verse 22, made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. If you'll remember from John's gospel, he knew the hearts of the multitude. He's not going to be held to what the multitudes want, especially when it violates what the Father wants. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. Now when we look at this, Jesus went up on this large hill, kind of you call it a mountain. It's not quite a legitimate mountain by our thoughts, but we have a lot of big hills we refer to as mountains. If you're from the hills, you will think of Batesville and Ramsey Mountain, not an actual mountain, but a very large hill. Jesus climbed up that hill so he could have time alone to pray. Now, have you ever thought 5 minutes is a long prayer? Maybe 10 minutes is a long prayer. I think, went 20, 30 minutes in prayer. It's not often that I go that long in one setting. Jesus prayed for 3 hours. From about 3 a.m. till about 6 a.m. is what I understand. That is a long portion of prayer. So whenever you pray and you're like, wow, that's just too much, please remember Jesus did more. And so we should keep that in mind as we honor God in our prayers. But Jesus had sent the disciples away. It takes a little while to go across the Sea of Galilee in a simple little sailboat. Even with oars, it can take a little while. At this current time, it's about 7 miles by 4 miles, the size of that large lake. At that time, it may have been more like 11 miles by 5-6 miles. Over the 2 millennia, the waters receded to a certain degree, but still, it takes a little while. And a lot of the wind is cut off by the surrounding hills, so it's not easy. And so they're in the middle of darkness, pretty much, and Jesus begins walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out for fear. Now, you and I would say, there are no such things as ghosts. And I would agree, biblically speaking, there are not. However, they lived in a very superstitious area. And one commentator put it this way, a very knowledgeable scholar said, even though their belief in the resurrection does not give for ghosts, they still were in a community that held on to such beliefs. And so if you'll remember that there are books that are not in our biblical canon, but were highly recognized as good reads at their time. These are oftentimes referred to as partially the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. All right? Pseudepigrapha is very out there, but they were very much liked because a lot of it really talked great about Israel, talked great about God bringing destruction on the nations. But it also had a lot of answers for stuff they didn't have answers for in the Bible. It's because God did not choose to expound on it. And it took liberties that couldn't possibly be there. One of those is funny enough, back in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 4, we have the sons of God coming to the daughters of man. And they take wives from them. Some have seen that as the godly line and the ungodly line mixing. Some have seen that as tyrannical kings taking the daughters, that whoever they wanted. And then you have another viewpoint, which was very prominent during this time period, that it was actually angels that had fallen that took wives for themselves. Now, I don't take that viewpoint, but one of the books of the Pseudepigrapha does. It's called Enoch, First Enoch. And they believe that the result were giants, literal giants. But then the reason they give for Noah's Ark and the destruction of the world by water was the giants was eating everybody. But that's not what the Bible says, is it? And then they say that ghosts and demons are the disembodied spirits of these actual giants. There's nothing biblical to account for that, and it actually does not follow biblical theology. But if you've grown up with things like that, even though you know it does not qualm with the Bible, it's very easy for those things to enter your mind and worry I've known very strong Christians that still get a little superstitious. And so they see something that looks like it's hovering or transporting over the water like a human figure. They don't have direct sight because it's dark. And who knows at this time whether or not there's any fog on the sea. That's not the main point, but it could be. All that would definitely make a spooky scene. And so they let their imaginations get the better of them. And so they cry out, "It's a ghost," and they cry out in fear. Now, if you're ever scared, do you ever just cry out or do you ever just yell? Every now and then when you're young, you think you can just scare someone and it's going to be okay. I remember, I think I was about 14, and I was home alone, and my parents were getting home, and so I hid so I could scare my dad. Interestingly enough, I got grounded for that. It was not worth it. But nonetheless, believe it or not, he didn't scream. He just, the look on his face, and then I got it. So they're worried, and understandably so to a certain extent, but Jesus does not leave them hanging. Verse 27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." Now, I'm going to ask the dumb question. Wait, since he didn't identify his name, how would they know it's him? Voice, that's how. Now, there's a story that my wife doesn't like, but I'll tell this because it taught me something. When I pastored the second church I pastored, we were staying in the parsonage, and one night the power went out. There were storms that go through, and I was up checking everything, and she thought I was still in bed. And so I'm coming down the hallway with the light and the door shut, and she's getting scared. So she's hitting my pillow thinking it's me. "Jerry, Jerry, Jerry." I open the door, I shine the light in, and she screams bloody murder. Because she's screaming, I don't know why, it put me on edge. And so I'm trying to say it's me, but I'm yelling it. Now you can imagine how that didn't help. Well, Jesus speaks in a way that they would know it's him. And they make the connection because we see what Peter says. Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water." Now, that sounds a little idiotic from our standpoint, but if someone's imitating Jesus, would they say the command the way Jesus does? And we may watch a lot of science fiction movies and think that just happens. No. One more story. When Nate was little and Addie was little, he was about 3.5, so she was about 1.5. And he's like, "Let's play a joke on Addie." And I'm sitting in his room with him, just, trying to spend some time with him. And he goes, "I'm going to make her think it's you. Addie, it's Daddy. Come here." And I'm sitting there going, there's no way in this world she would think it's him or me, because he had a little squeaky voice as a 3-year-old. But it was hilarious. They knew the voice of Jesus. And so when Jesus says in verse 29, he said, "Come," Peter had come out of the boat. He walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now, let me go ahead and say this to you. This does take trust, doesn't it? He heard the voice of Jesus, and he trusted that voice. He'd been around it. He had been walking with him, serving him, helping him, listening to him, and learning from him for a great deal of time by this point. And so he knows his voice. And so Peter, unlike the other 11, gets out of the boat, and he begins to walk. But don't you always have to be afraid of that? Verse 30, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me!" Interesting. He begins to walk. Here's a lesson that we learn from this, and as we're about to learn here in a second. It's an important thing to walk by faith. It's a harder thing to maintain that walk. Because hardships, difficulties, fears, frustrations can begin to take our attention away from Jesus. And so his trust waned in that moment. But notice he still had enough trust to call out, "Save me. Lord, save me." When we're having difficulties, don't be afraid to cry out and say, "Lord, save me. Lord, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. Now, a couple of things I want you to see. First thing, Peter did show faith. The others didn't even get out. So we're not going to hurt on and throw anything bad on Peter. He's human. But he did have a moment of doubt that crept in. Even those who walked with Jesus, who saw him do great miracles, bring people back from the dead, heal leprosy, pull out demons, and control the weather, they still had moments of doubt because we are fallible. We are broken humans. But the key thing is that we do not live in that doubt, maintain that doubt. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't understand, Lord, help me. But it may require us to actually walk by faith. And might I remind you, we do not define that faith as blind faith. It's reasonable faith. Because let me say this. If you were walking down a dark hallway that you can't see, but you've been down the hallway, and you can't see anything, but someone comes up next to you, you know who it is, and you grab their hand, and y'all walk together, or y'all walk side by side because you know they have your back. You don't see where you're going, but why do you trust them? Well, I've been around them. They raised me. Or, we've been through all this before. I know I can trust them. Would that be blind faith or reasonable faith? Because you know you can trust them. Not a soldier. But there's a reason soldiers develop such close bonds with their fellow soldiers. And one of those things that they get is that camaraderie. And why is it that they can go into a firefight and just trust one another? Because that trust is built up over time. So here's my point. God's not asking us to walk somewhere without any evidence that he's trustworthy. There's biblical evidence and life evidence that we have. He's trustworthy. So when we go into a place where we're following him and we don't know what's going on, that's not blind faith. He's taken care of us before. He will do it again. It's a reasonable faith, but it does still require that trust. Also, Peter cried out, Lord, save me. I want to take you to a passage that's very interesting and I think is to an extent connectable in Psalms, or the 18th Psalm, verse, I believe it's 16, but we'll get there and we'll see if my memory is accurate. He sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of many waters. Now, there's a whole context here to this specific song, but nonetheless, it would not be uncommon for a Jewish person to connect something from the Old Testament and apply it to their situation. But do you know what's interesting about Jesus' miracle here? We know that Jesus calmed the seas. In the Old Testament, we have people such as Moses, Joshua, Elijah, and Elisha specifically, that parted seas, that had some kind of water miracle done through them or around them. But none of them walked on the sea. Interestingly enough, in the wisdom book of Job, chapter 9, and I believe it's verse 8, I'm going to find out. There's a passage that would have or should have come to their mind. Verse 8, he alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea, referring to God. So if Jesus is the one that's doing this, what would that indicate about him? He's God. And so like Jesus calming the seas, that's also a place within the Psalms that would have been quickly connected. He is God. But it was hard for them to understand that because he was also flesh. He had been born into flesh, taken on flesh. The infinite took on a portion of finiteness. How does that work? I don't know. But what I want you to see here is that Jesus fulfills aspects in the Old Testament that can only be connected with God. Once again, indicating his deity. So when this is over, they came together in the boat and they worship him. And they say, truly you are the Son of God. Now these titles can have multiple meanings. Son of Man can refer to someone that's just human. In the prophet Ezekiel, in his prophecy, multiple times he's referred to as Son of Man, Son of Man, Son of Man. You're just a guy. But in Daniel 7, there's one as the Son of Man that came to the Ancient of Days on the clouds of heaven. And clearly this is not a man. Jesus calls himself Son of Man constantly, and there's a few places where he specifically alludes to Daniel 7. But Son of God can refer to being the Son of God or just a very godly figure. Here, there's no doubt the implication is that he's God's Son. I've been doing some reading lately of how many early Christians had trouble with this. How can God have a son? How can he be God? And they had so many ways trying to figure it out. But here's the thing. God is one being, but he is three persons within his being. And these aren't simply personalities. These are personages. These are persons. But they are one being together. And they relate to one another in his being. It's just beyond our comprehension. And so the Father and the Son have always had a relationship as Father and Son. Not progenitive, but relational. If you imagine, and this is a bad analogy because there's no perfect analogy. If you imagine a guy and a young man that have a father-son relationship, he may not have generated that son. He may not have been the one who gave the genetic information for that son to be born, but they've developed that kind of relationship. But in the Godhead, there's always been a relation within him as one of a father, one of son, and one of spirit or sent one. So it's very fascinating. But Jesus, they recognize you must be the Son of God. You must have his attributes. You are divine. Did they fully understand that? No, how could they? But they understood just a little bit of it. Can we fully understand it? I don't think so. I think it's beyond our full aptitude for understanding. But we can understand a little bit of it enough. I don't understand rocket science, but I've seen a rocket go up into space on TV, not in person. And now they've got some of them that can fly back down and sit itself. It's the weirdest thing. I had a family member say, he said, I can't wait until they get these cars to where they can drive themselves and it's affordable for everyone. I'm like, well, are you ready to be retired? Because if it ever happens, we're going to be retired. And he laughed. But we may not understand all that goes into it, but we can see what Scripture tells us about it. What can we take from all of this? There's a lot of little things we can take. Number one, Jesus did not reciprocate their superstition. In fact, he indicated, I'm not a ghost, it's me. And by the way, after his resurrection, they're going to think he's a ghost. And he makes the point, does ghosts have flesh and blood? Or bone and flesh? No. So let's not go into superstition. Let's go into biblical theology. What does it teach? And let's go with that. We should trust God, but understand that that will sometimes be extremely difficult. When we start the walk of faith, it's hard to keep going in that walk of faith. A lot of times, just to save energy and I don't want to deal with it, I'll come here and I'll just walk through here to go where I need to go without turning on a light. And my kids get very worried. And they'll come take my hand, and every now and then, why aren't you afraid? Been through these halls a lot. I can normally find my way around them all right. There's just enough light from those exit signs that I can see okay enough. But they trust me enough. They can't see. We need to trust God. We know that he sees all. And we need to recognize that, like the disciples, we'll have moments where our faith is not as strong as it needs to be. Instead of getting entirely down on ourselves, let's seek to trust God more. And I don't think it's wrong to do as the disciples did on a different occasion. Lord, give us greater faith. We know where to go. Cry out to God, Lord, save me. And we should be ever mindful. always amazed at what Jesus did, who he was, and how amazing that really is. So even from this one event that we've heard about, read about for years, Nick, shush, there are many lessons that we draw from it, learning more about Jesus. But I want you to know there's going to come a time where we're going to be in his presence. And I don't know that the learning is going to stop. I think we're going to keep learning. I think we're going to be continually amazed. If the four beasts and the 24 elders in Revelation are always gooing and gawing over God, why wouldn't we? I look forward to that day. But until that day, let's make use of what we have in God's Word. Learn and live on that learning. Any questions or comments?